the Israeli government offices and also in the academia. Omer's academic background is at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he did a research thesis focused on demographic, cultural, and religious transformation of population in medieval Eretz Israel, medieval land of Israel. Omer taught in the geography department in the Hebrew University, including a course called Historical Geography of Jerusalem. So Omer, the stage is all yours.
Nadav.
Yes.
Before you begin, let's just introduce ourselves as the shlichim who.
Sure. Sorry.
Here, I'll just share. Here, I'll just change it. So this event is happening in cooperation with 3 different congregations. Nadav is the original person who arranged with Omer to do this amazing discussion, and then with Bnei Tzedek, and then Bnei Israel joined, and we have Beit Shalom here with Tomer as well. So I think the fact that we're doing a cooperation with 3 synagogues really shows how special these times are, that we're collaborating and able to do something like this together. And the fact that you saw new people is because we're all different congregations here cooperating. So whoever does not know me, my name is Netta Asner Minster. I have 2 names because I got married in December. And I'm the shlicha for Bnei Israel congregation. Tomer and I are also part of a project called Life Online that a couple of shlichim in the area have collaborated together in order to create content. So once Omer begins speaking, I'm going to put in the chat really quickly our weekly email to sign up to our Facebook group and the Google Calendar, to just so you guys can see more content that we provide as well. And I'll allow Tomer as well to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Tomer, and I'm the shaliach here in Beit Shalom in Potomac, and I'm really excited to hear Omer. I know Omer, just in general, never heard him actually speaking, so I'm really curious to hear what he got to say about Jerusalem. Just fun fact, I think Nadav and I are in the same unit in
reserves, yes.
In reserve, I think, and this is actually part of Jerusalem brigade. So, like, it's really an honor to be part, at least in reserve, to be part of this unit that liberated Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is my favorite city in Israel. I love to go there, to the shuk, to the old city. They have really amazing vibe there. And I really hope one day I will get actually to live there. That's my dream. Let's celebrate Jerusalem. And in Israel, Jerusalem, you celebrate also with the, you cannot see the flag. You have this flags march over there, so it's the parade. So I love this day. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you, Omer, for introducing yourself. And I'm sure Omer's lecture is going to raise you a lot of questions. So if you may, send your question either to me, to Netta, or Tomer in private chat. We will write it down, and in about 8:20, we will have time especially for questions. Okay? Thank you for cooperation. Netta, do you want to add anything?
No, you're perfect. You're fine.
Okay. Omer, go for it.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, shlichim. Good evening, everybody that joined us. Everybody that joined us this evening. Just a second. Just a technical thing.
Wait, what do you need to do? Just so we can help, maybe?
Yeah, just a little technical thing on my computer.
Tomer, you need to take a photo of that.
Okay, Are you seeing the screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
Yeah, we see it.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So good evening again, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for the kind introduction. We're celebrating today Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim. And I'm very, very excited for being invited to talk here. Jerusalem, the holiest city for the Jewish people, the city of the first and second temple, the city of the greatest Jewish king, and the city that we aspired and dreamed to come back to for 2,000 years. This city and the Jewish heritage of Jerusalem also laid the foundations for other tradition, the Muslim tradition and the Christian tradition, and make Jerusalem famous for half and holy for half of the world's population. I think the picture that we all know of Jerusalem, and which is here on the first slide, demonstrating the fascinating story of this city in 1 square kilometer, the holiest place for the Jewish people, the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, the synagogues in the Jewish quarter, and also the diversity as we see the Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Holy Sepulchre Church, and of course, Western Jerusalem, the new part of Jerusalem, built mainly throughout the 20th century as Israel became, and you see the towers, the capital of Israel. Jerusalem changed regimes dozens of times throughout the history. And today that we mentioned Jerusalem celebrating actually the city, the new parts of the city and the old parts of the city together as the capital of Israel. Being the city of the temple for the Jewish people, and being the capital of Israel, the capital of King David, of King Solomon, of the United Kingdom of Israel, and then its Second Temple time, and also in the modern era, was never easy in any aspect and demanded huge efforts to make it happen despite, and I'm saying despite, difficult conditions. It's not a city with natural resources. It's not a city on a main road. It doesn't have the condition that each big capital city, or almost each big capital city in the world, has. Also, trying to tell the story of Jerusalem in 1 hour or in 45 minutes is almost impossible. Actually, this is part of a course that usually consists at least 4 sessions. So in order to take you throughout the journey, I picked 4 main points. The first one is from Jebusite Canaanite city. At the time of the settlements of the tribes to becoming King David capital, and in this capital building the temple by King Solomon. The next point, the second point, will be Jerusalem in its glorious era in the Second Temple time. We'll make some quick comment. What happened to Jerusalem in 2,000 years when Jews were in exile? Quick comments about Christianity and Islam in Jerusalem, and I think it's important for understanding our aspirations, our dreams to come back to the city, and of course the processes that made Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel in the 20th century, which actually started before 1948. I invite you, as Jerusalem is precious to all of us and is known for all of us, to choose and to think at this point of time of one site in Jerusalem that you love, or that you want to revisit in your next trip to Israel, and take it with you throughout the next hour and throughout the journey that we'll try to do together. So from time to time, I ask people, what is the first Jewish city? And the natural answer is Jerusalem. But actually, Jerusalem, before it was a Jewish city, it was a Canaanite city, belonged to a tribe called the Jebusite. Actually, it was a small city in the mountain ridge of Israel that was limited by poor natural and geographical conditions. You can see here, this is an illustration of the Jebusite Canaanite city 4,000 years ago. You see it's all about 60 acres. It's on a small ridge. It's not in the highest point of Jerusalem, but actually in one of the lowest points of Jerusalem. I'm talking about the topography of the city, one of the lowest. And why it was on one of the lowest points of Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem has only one water source, and this is the Gihon Spring, which is over here. When you visit the city of David today, the archaeological site, you can visit the Gihon Spring and see it. So Jerusalem was limited geographically, naturally, by water resources, and also limited from food resources. The agricultural areas and the fertile areas was only here in the Kidron valley next to the spring, and this is actually made it mid-sized town, a mid-sized town in Israel. Of course, some more conditions that were important were the natural defense of the city, and you can see that it is surrounded by deep valleys from three sides: the Kinturon Valley, another valley here that's today called the street of Bet Habad, and another valley in the south. So a mid-sized fortified city with a wall. So how old is Jerusalem? Actually, how many times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Torah, in the 5 books of Torah? Literally not even once. There is one little clue in the Torah for Jerusalem, and this is when Tzedek, the king of Shalem or Salem, which reminds the name of Jerusalem, but it's not the actual name, greeting Abraham after Abraham comes back from the battle with the 4 kings of the east. Besides this, Jerusalem is first mentioned in the Bible only later in the book of Joshua. If we try to give a date, so it's about the 13th century BC or 3,300 years ago. But it seems that at that time, the tribes already know the name Jerusalem. And we ask why. So the 2 earliest historical mentioning of Jerusalem, or evidence for Jerusalem, are from 2 inscriptions from Egypt. One is from almost 4,000 years ago, the 19th century, called the Execration Text. Actually, you can see it here. It's pieces of clay. Sometimes looks like a doll, that when the Egyptian kings, pharaohs, want to curse a city or a population, they would write the name on a piece of clay and then break it. So we see from 4,000 years ago, first time Jerusalem is mentioned as Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim, reminding the sound Yerushalayim, and this is actually sends us a very clear message. This Jebusite city, as we know from the Bible, is already existing as a city, as a political, social issue 4,000 years ago. Another text is again from Egypt. Several letters sent from governors around the area of Israel and Syria and Jordan to Pharaoh, asking for asking or reporting different situation in Israel. In this case, a king name or a governor named Abdi Heba, and he is the governor of Jerusalem, very similar to the sound of Jerusalem. 3,400 years ago, sent to Pharaoh a letter saying, asking for military help against local enemies, and in a very urgent sense. So what do we learn? What do we learn from these inscriptions and the archaeological findings? And at the time of these inscriptions, Jerusalem was surrounded by wall. We'll see the fortification, the archaeological excavations around the Gihon Spring, which are from the same date. So what do we learn? Jerusalem is a very ancient city, at least probably more, 4,000 years old, settlement with relations to the local empire at that time, to Egypt, dealing with taxation and military relation, mid-size, 45, and this is the city that the 12 tribes that come to the land of Israel know. This is the city they meet. So what is the process that brings Jerusalem from Jebusite town to King David's capital? This is very interesting, since Jerusalem was exactly here in the border, and you can see the settlements of the tribes, the different area each tribe received. And Jerusalem is here between Benjamin and Judea, exactly on the border. And the descriptions in the Bible are very, very general about it, but they declare a very clear thing. And I'll use two examples. One is from Joshua 15:63. As for the Jebusite, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children or the sons of Judea could not drive them out. It's on the border between the two tribes, so almost similar sentence from the book of Judges. And the children or sons of Benjamin did not drive the Jebusite inhabitant of Jerusalem. So it's supposed to be given to the tribes, or be part of the territory of the 12 tribes, but none of them during the period of the settlement could actually conquer the city. Also, it's a mid-town city, limited by the natural resources and mainly the water, but it is not on the main roads, the ancient main roads of Jerusalem. One main road was the Via Maris, going along the coastline, connecting North Africa with Syria in the north. Another main road was what's called the King's Road in Jordan, connecting the area of Saudi Arabia, again, to Syria, Iraq, and the northern empires of that time. Jerusalem, here on the mountain ridge, in the middle of the two roads, are not on the main road, not in a junction between two roads, and seems not to be very important at that time. But actually, these are the perfect conditions for King David when choosing his capital. Jerusalem, unique status. The city of Jebus as a foreign city within an area inhabited by the Israelis, and being a city with not affiliation to particularly religious, Canaanite religious, at that time, Jewish religious tradition, and I'm putting the Isaac Binding aside for a moment, allows King David to choose it as his capital city, free of any sediment or internal conflict. None of the tribes actually took it. It was free at the time, and and perfect for King David to choose it as the capital, and for King Solomon to establish the temple in. So, how did he do it? The Battle of Jerusalem is described in a very short two descriptions in the Bible. I will use one of them from the book of Samuel. And you can see it. David said on that day, "Whoever strike down the Jebusite, let him get up the water shaft." So this is the story of how the Israelites conquered the city, and from dozens of years, researchers looked for evidence for this military campaign. When a water shaft was discovered back in the 19th century, right here next to the Gihon Spring, people say, "Okay, we have a water shaft that connect the spring to the city. This must be the same water shaft that King David talked about, and completed the heroic story of the warriors climbing up this shaft which connected the Gihon Spring to the city. Later theories, there is a question mark here, because later theories say that the water shaft is in a different place and used to purify the hands of the Israelis after the battle, etc. But we can see here that this is the city that King David takes over. You can see the great towers, and this is the Canaanite towers, even before the time of David, 4,000 years old, that guarded the only water source of Jerusalem. And this is what King David makes his capital. How you make a city a capital. Just before that, another quick comment. This mountain is the threshing floor of what is going to be, and remember it, what is going to be the place of the temple, but not in the time of King David. What King David does to establish his city as a capital. It's not enough to say, "I took over the city, I call it now the city of David," but he has to give it both political government institutions and both spiritual institutions. And you'll see that from now on throughout the history, including in the 20th century, this is the process that the city will do. So what King David does? First, he uses helps of another allied kings. In this case, the help of Hiram, king of Tyre, of Tzor, who send messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built, as it described in the book of Samuel, they built David's house. In 2005, and you can see the walls here. This is archaeological excavations on the top of the site, the archaeological site of the city of David. The archaeologist Eilat Mazar discovered very, very solid remaining of a building, of a big building, and she claimed this might be the city of the house of David, the citadel of David. Of course, we have no proofs of that, and archaeologists argue about it, but it might be, and we raise it here as a possibility. So this is one thing, and this is the political act of making Jerusalem the capital. I'm taking over the city, I'm saying this is the capital of the United Kingdom of Israel, and I'm building a palace. What will accompany the city from this point on is not only being political center, but also a spiritual center. And what David tries is preparing the ground for the temple. At that time, and I found it funny when I prepared this lecture, there was a pandemic, a pledge among the tribes of Israel, and David is being told to build an altar to build an altar, and this circumstances bring him to purchasing the threshing floor from Arvaneh, the Jebusite figure, and he buys his threshing floor on the mountain above the city, which Mount Moriah, the place where the temple will be built in the days of King Solomon. King David insists to pay for this field, for this land that he bought, and this is what will give later on promising, or this will promise the legal right on the land for the temple. So he builds the altar, he builds the altar, and as it's described in the book of Samuel, after he builds the altar and offered offerings and peace offerings, and the Lord was entreated for the land, and the pledge was paid from Israel. So this was the first circumstances. He bought this land, he built the altar, and he prepared the area for very, very important religious, spiritual project, building the temple. It wasn't only it, he also brought the Ark of Covenant that was before that in Bethel and Shiloh, and was taken with the tribes of Israel to every important battle. So now the journey of the Ark of Covenant is about to end. King David will bring it, and it's described in the book of Samuel, and they brought it, they brought the Ark of Covenant, the Ark of the Lord, and set it in his place in the tabernacle that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. So they brought the Holy of the Holies, the Ark of Covenant, to Jerusalem. They built a tent for it, and they adjusted ceremonies to it. So this is the first act, or all what we discussed so far. The first act of making Jerusalem the capital of Israel, of the 12 tribes, of the United Kingdom of Israel. And you see, it wasn't natural. It was a huge effort making it both spiritual and political capital. This is a model of Jerusalem in First Temple time. What you see here, this is the city of, can you see what I point out? Here? The little section, this little section surrounded by mall, this is the city of David. It is very, very small. This is parallel to the Jebusite city, 60 acres. Of course, King Solomon will build the temple right here on the Temple Mount. It's interesting to see what we call a temple at that time, because we have to remember this is one of the lowest places in Jerusalem. And even when you visit today in Jerusalem and you come from the Jewish quarter and you want to go to the Temple Mount, are you going uphill or down here? You go down here. If you come from the Mount of Olive and you want to come to the Temple Mount, you go uphill or down here? You go down here. If you want to come from Mount of Scopus, Har HaTzofim, to the Temple Mount, you go down here. So this is a very weird mountain, right? It's very low. But we have to remember all the time that it was called a mountain, but the people who lived here in the city of David, which was in a very low place near the only water source, the Gihon spring, and they had to appeal to this place, to the Temple Mount, and this place is called the Ophel. The Ophel is from the Hebrew name of Le'apil, to climb up to the temple. So the geography and the words are very well connected. Very well connected here. Of course, the temple, King Solomon temple, was a magnificent building. It took 7 years to build it. It says that 150,000 workers worked there. And of course, it had all the elements of the temple, the Holy of the Holies with the Ark of Covenant, the Heichal, the main chamber, the porch, the chambers, the courts. It contained all of it. So the capital city and the temple. Another very interesting thing that that happened at that time, that the city got 5 times bigger. You can see this is the city of David, this is the temple, and this is what happened to the city during the first temple time. We talk about a period of time. The first temple was built 3,000 years ago, so almost 3,000 years ago, at the 10th century BC. And in a very short period of time, the city got 5 times bigger. So what happened at that time? The kingdom of United Kingdom was splitted. There was the kingdom of Judea and the kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Israel at the year 722 BC was distracted by the Assyrians. Although the kingdom was split at that time, Jerusalem received many refugees from the destruction of the 10 tribes, the destruction of Israel, and in a very short time got much bigger. At that time, initially it got bigger. People lived outside the walls of the city of David, and it was not surrounded by wall. The wall was built in a second stage. And what was this stage? Very urgent story. Judea and Jerusalem is preparing for catastrophe. They are making a mistake that will repeat itself, and they have to choose who to go with, which regional empire of that time, to go with the Assyrians or to go with the Egyptians. And they choose at that time, they choose wrong. They are going with the Egyptian, and the Assyrians come. They will arrive at 701 BC to Jerusalem, and the city will be threatened. It will be threatened in 2 ways. One, there is large population of the city which sits outside the city of David, and the other one, the only source of water, if it's taken, the city is over. And that time, King Hezekiah did 2 major, huge acts in order to defend the city. One, he built huge wall to defend all the refugees. The other one, he built a water tunnel to bring the water from the Gihon spring inside the city. And if we talked about King David and we saw the archaeological excavation and we wondered if it was from the time of David or it wasn't from the time of David and it was debatable, here we see that it's huge effort to defend Jerusalem. We see it in the field, we see it in the archaeology. One is the wide wall, which, as we call today, in the old city of Jerusalem, inside the Jewish quarter, and we saw that it was built in great sense of urgency. It's also described in the book of Isaiah. You saw that the walls of the city of David were broken through in many places. You counted the buildings in Jerusalem, tore down the houses, and took the stones to build and strengthen the wall. And I don't have a good enough picture here, but here we can see that the wall actually go above the houses. So Jerusalem receiving refugees and defending them. The other one is building this tunnel. It's 500, actually almost 600 yards tunnel curved under the city of David, bringing the water from outside the city to a pool called Silwan Pool or Shiloach Pool inside the city. And this is, in this way, has defend defend the city, and you can see that in the books of Kings he's admitted for that.
Just a second, Omer. You have 10 minutes, okay?
Yes. Okay. So he will save the city, and the city will stand the siege. The city will stand the siege for another 100 and something year until the year 586 BC. What we can here say, I'll skip that. The political life in Jerusalem, we have many evidence for that, and actually figures like Mariah, son of Shaphan, Jokal, son of Shmaliah, Gedaliah, the son of Pashhur, and some others, which are mentioned in the Bible, including in very critical times. Some of them criticize Jeremiah, a prophecy that the city will be distracted, and call to kill him. Actually, it's these two in the middle, and these stories are described in the Bible, and we see their stamps in the city of David. So we see it's also a political center. The destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, again, bad choosing of which side to go with, Babylon or the Egyptian, and we see that the destruction is very, very harsh. The houses are burned, the house of God is on fire, the king kids are persecuted, are executed in front of the Zedekiah, the king, and after they do it in front of his eyes, they as it said, put out the eyes of Hezekiah. Very dramatical description. And the people of Israel, of course, go to exile in Babylon. We'll see that shortly after that, actually 50 years, as Koresh gives his declaration, allowing the people of Israel to come back. Sorry. They come back, the Shavei Zion are coming back, Ezra is coming back, Nehemiah is coming back, and they will rebuild the temple. This is not the temple that you see here in the model. It was a very modest one, and actually they used the help of the people who stayed in exile in Babylon. They used their support to build a temple, and then Nehemiah, which was a minister in Babylon, heard how bad the situation is in Jerusalem, the security situation, and he got permission from the king to come and to rebuild the walls. He describes that the walls, it was all ruined, and we have this description in his Nehemiah book. It was all distracted, and actually he had to put the city of David, this part of the city. He built the wall excluding this part because it was completely ruined. The second temple that was initially built was very poor, and how it's described in the antiques of Jews. It says that the elders of the families recalling to mind the former temple, which had been very great and costly, and seeing that the one recently constructed fell short of the old one. And it was like that for several generations until the time of King Herod. King Herod was a very special figure in very special time. At that time, and we're skipping the Hashmoneans' time to the time of the Roman Empire controlled Israel, and King Herod was a king under the patronage of the Roman Empire. So he had to satisfy them, but he also had to satisfy the Jews, because he was from a very complex background. His father, Antipatros, was Edomite, and he was turned into Judaism just a generation before. And his mother, Kipros, was from Arabic background. So he had, in order to be fond both or liked both by the Jews and the Romans, he had to do to act in front of both of them. So what he does for the Jews is building the great Temple Mount as we know today. He couldn't rebuild the temple itself bigger because there are specific directions of how to build the temple, which you see right here on the Temple Mount. But what he did is building a huge podium surrounding the Temple Mount. It is almost 300 yards over here and 500 yards over here. And a magnificent, giving glory to the temple that stood in the middle. He built traditional gates to the temple from or leading to the area of the city of David, but the main entrances were from the west, where the new city was built, and you can see the magnificent arches, the Arch of Robinson that we see the remains today, and the Arch of Wilson here. The western wall is 80 meters, is 80 meters part of this huge wall that support the podium of the temple, and we'll discuss shortly, and we'll see shortly how it became the holiest place for the Jewish people after the destruction of the temple. The destruction itself, for several reasons, will not dive deep into that. But by the Romans was very harsh. Again, we can see here the southern part of the western wall, and we see that the stones of the temple fell on the street. You can see this huge stone destructing the street, and how severe was the destruction of the second temple. We can see inscription in Hebrew that were on the upper corner of this huge podium at the place that in Hebrew inscriptions, and we can see that that the menorah from the temple was taken to Rome by Titus, who actually was fighting here to win the Jewish rebellion. What happened after the second temple? The second temple destruction, also very interesting. And it's interesting because both in Christian times and both in Muslim times, actually not having the temple itself, or not having the temple in its destruction, was an evidence for the new religion's true way, and humiliation of the Jewish religion by the Christian government. It was actually Christian governmental interest to prove that the full inheritance of the religion by the Christian is the true way. And we can see here maps, Christian maps that actually exclude the Temple Mount from Jerusalem, although it's the largest monument at the time of throughout the history. And we can see that they emphasize the Holy Sepulchre Church, which is over here, and the temple is supposed to be here in the Christian maps, just not here. This is a map, Medaba map from the 6th century. We see also churches on the Mount of Olives, places according to Christian tradition that Jesus prayed there and cried there for the destiny of Jerusalem. We see that they watch the temple, but the temple is not there. And this is part of an agenda. So when we ask ourselves why we cannot approach 2,000 years to Jerusalem, why we are aspiring, dreaming to come back to the city, we have to remember that during the 2,000 years, Jerusalem was controlled by different regimes with different agendas, and sometimes, or most of the time, hostile to the Jews. Another example is the Muslim tradition, which is very interesting. We'll not dive into. Just say that it's the third holiest place for Islam. They recognize the place of the temple, but for different traditions. From him, Muhammad came one night and went up to the sky and had very interesting discussion with angels and with God and etc. But they built the mosque on the southern part, saying, we are unlike the Jews, we were not commanded on the rock, on the foundation rock, on the same rock that Abraham binded Isaac. We were commanded on the Kaaba, on Mecca and Medina, and building their main mosque on the south towards Mecca and Medina. So again, recognizing the Jewish tradition, memorizing the Jewish tradition, but saying this is not us. Jerusalem is holy for us, but they were wrong, we are right, and we are taking to a different place. So saying that to give a sense of what was in Jerusalem in 2,000 years, this is fascinating. It's fascinating to see how the Jews relate to that, but this is for a different day. So how, after 2,000 years of exile, Jews came back to Jerusalem? And to say that in the 20th century, at the beginning of the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, the attitude of the Zionist organizations and Zionist political movement was ambivalent towards Jerusalem. There were other cities more safe in center of population, cities like Tel Aviv that were built from scratch by Jews and Israelis, and Jerusalem was a different case, and city within the Ottoman Empire, not a lot of Jews at the time. And what was the turning point? And I would say that the turning point was the British conquest of the city, the British conquest of the city in World War I. It was part of an overall campaign against the Ottoman Empire. But as they got close to the city, there was great excitement. After taking over Gaza, General Allenby was given very excitedly the British cabinet authority and request for conquering Jerusalem, and he entered the city. The city actually surrendered in December 9th, 1917, and he, although he was a great horse rider, when he entered the city, and this is what you see here, went down from his horse and entered by foot. Although the British took over huge areas in Jordan and in Eretz Israel for religious reason, they chose Jerusalem to be their capital. And this is very important because it gave great excitement for the Jews to bringing again Jerusalem as the capital for practical discussions. Here we see the surrendering of Jerusalem and General Allenby promising that they will keep Jerusalem, they will honor each of the three religions in Jerusalem and keep their sacred, holy places. the British will build Jerusalem, they will build the High Commissioner Palace, what we call the Armon HaNetziv, or the government house in Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem, and will build the municipality in Jerusalem. They'll develop greatly the city of Jerusalem. So how the Jewish or the Zionist movement that just after years of Muslim regime was now under British mandate, and they fought with the British, alongside with the British in the First World War, and now they have an opportunity. This opportunity is also got great push just a few months before with the Balfour Declaration that recognized the right of the Jewish people to have a national house in the land of Israel. So now we have two political or geopolitical consequences that come to, or factors that come together, both the declaration and actually having a British role in the area. And what is the first thing that the Zionist movement do? Anyone recognize that? This is Mount Scopus, and the first thing, only 6 months after the British conquered Jerusalem, the Zionist movement laid the cornerstone for the Hebrew University here in July 24th, 1918. And why? Why? So we talked about the two unique conditions. So why do they choose to have the first big national project as the Hebrew University? And when we dive back into the documentation at that time, we see that they looked for several things when they thought what we have first to do. One is to have something that is linked to Eretz Israel. Another one is to have collaboration between Jews in Israel and Jews who live outside in Israel in other countries. They wanted something that can be started immediately, and they want something that will contribute to the cultural character of the country. And all of this is political reasons, but also spiritual reasons. They say it is important. One of the first institutions in the Hebrew University, as it was planned in the very beginning, was the Center for Jewish Studies. And they said that it will be crucial for the revival of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel and strengthen the connection between the Jews in Eretz Israel and the communities in the diaspora. Actually, the assumption was that the Jewish and the Hebrew studies will be in the highest level in the world, and in this, and students from the diaspora will come back will study in the Hebrew University and will come back to their communities as teachers. In this way, as they said it, the university will fulfill its ultimate role, strengthening the connection between Eretz Israel and the Jewish world, and make Eretz Israel as real, contemporary, spiritual center for the global Jewish community. Where they choose to do it? On the highest mountain in Jerusalem. This is Mount Scopus. Connect the two things. As they say, spiritual center on the highest mountain of Jerusalem. So,
Omer, do we have time for questions a little bit? Because it's 8:27.
Yeah. So, is it will take another 5 minutes?
I need to attend another Zoom meeting in 8:30. So
I will continue. You can have 5 more minutes. It's fine.
Yes.
And then we'll do questions. So 5 more minutes, but then we want to have time for questions as well.
Okay, so let's take 5 more minutes. 5 years, actually 7 years later, the great ceremony, and everybody is attending it. People are describing it. If we take the greatest poet, the greatest Hebrew poet at the time, so he says a holiday to be celebrated today, and this is what you see here on the video. In display is not a holiday that someone has fabricated from his heart, but a great and holy day for our Lord and our people. And the newspaper described it as the new temple establishment, considered it the end of time, the fulfillment of Isaiah prophecy. So I would claim that the first thing that the Zionist movement chose to do when the conditions allowed is to rebuild. It's not the religious temple, but it's the first national temple with great connection to the Jewish tradition, to the Hebrew language, and its role as a spiritual center, not only for the Jews in Israel, but the Jews all over the world, as I described the connection and the plans before. I skip forward. And there is a little problem in 1948 when Jerusalem is divided into two cities. The eastern cities, which include the old city in Jerusalem, the western wall is there. It's not part of the Israeli Jerusalem. And the university, the new national temple, the spiritual temple of the New Jerusalem, is a dangerous enclave within the Jordanian territory. This brings the Israelis to actually build and think of new institutions, of new temples, of new national temples, of new spiritual centers. And one of the greatest examples is bringing Herzl to burial in Jerusalem. Herzl, of course, known to all of us, called in Hebrew Jose Medina, the visionary of the state, at the end of the 19th century, gathered the first Zionist, actually the Zionist Congress, did a lot of political activities to promote the Jewish state idea, and the visionary of the Jewish state. This is how he's remembered. He died in 1904. And in his will, he said that he should have the poorest class funeral without speeches or flowers. And he added, I wish to be buried in a vault beside my father and to lie there until the Jewish people shall take my remains to Israel. So this was his will in 1904. In 1948, the leadership of Israel discussed how to fulfill this will. Whether he should be buried in Haifa, and why Haifa? Because in his book, Alt Neuland, he described Haifa, and his hero in this book has to be buried in Haifa. He doesn't say where in Israel he wants to be buried, but he left a clue, or maybe a clue, in the book Alt Neuland. Maybe in Tel Aviv, the first Hebrew city in history built from scratch in 1909, and the mayor Dizengoff asked to do that, or in Jerusalem, and the final choice is to do it in Jerusalem. Not only in Jerusalem, again in the highest mountain in Western Jerusalem. Remind me of something: Temple Mount, Mount of Scopus, and now mountain that we'll call a few months later Mount Herzl, the highest point of Western Jerusalem. And they bring, I'll not describe the whole ceremony, but it is amazing and worth a conversation by itself, but I just brought the end of it. 25-minute ceremonies. Herzl asked not to make any speeches, only Kaddish was read there, and El Maleh Rachamim. And one of the, I'll jump directly to one of the most interesting and beautiful parts. This is this one. 6,000 people attended it. And most of the representatives, each village, town, or city, each settlement of Israel sent a representative. Each of them brought a bag with soil, with sand, with rocks from his settlement. And they brought one by one, 1,400 representatives walked through. And here you can see it. They walked one by one from all around the country and threw the bags with the soil on, and here you can see it very beautifully, on the grave. Again, creating, I would say, a national, not religious, but a national temple in Jerusalem, when the Israeli leadership have to cope with the question, how in the new capital of Israel, which is divided and we cannot access the holy places, how can we create spiritual centers? And this was the first act right after the Jerusalem was announced, or actually right after the Declaration of Independence. Again, and we saw it from King David. And we see it
Omer, are you summarizing here?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. We can see that each place has a ceremony and traditions that are attached to it. And here we can see that the opening of Independence Day is celebrated from 1949, 1950, and you can see the picture on the left, up to these days, and this is last year, is celebrated here at Mount Herzl, next to Herzl grave. So again, creating spiritual center, attaching a ceremony to it. I will not go through the rest of the example, and also additional example of creating a religious center in Western Jerusalem, in Mount Zion, in King David tomb for the next Yom Yerushalayim session next year. But also very, very interesting how to take a place and make it magnify its holiness. And of course, the Western Wall, which is after 1967, and united Jerusalem, or when Jerusalem is united again, it's coming back to the for Jewish people. You can see 1948, 1967, the connection between, I'll not put the whole thing, I'll just tell about it, but the connection between holy place, spiritual place, and national place is also reflected in the Western Wall. As we see that many ceremonies are there, but one of the most important, there are two independence, which we saw in Herzl grave in Mount Herzl. And this is the Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day, which is the main ceremony, is in the Western Wall, in the Kotel. You can see here the chief of staff talking in the last one during the Corona. It was all empty. It was very exciting. Him talking about the Jewish remains, the Jewish legacy, and the price that we made to come back to this place. You can see the very strong connection between religious holiness and national holiness in Jerusalem. And I will summarize that what I try to take you through in this journey in 1 hour, which is very ambitious, or less than 1 hour, is the huge efforts that the Jews made throughout history to make, although very hard conditions, natural conditions, geographical conditions, political conditions, to make Jerusalem as the capital which is holy for religious reasons and holy for national reasons. I'll end up with saying, Happy Yom Yerushalayim. I think we can be very happy with our city, united city, that we can live in. This is the grass in the Hebrew University. There is high-tech industry in Jerusalem. We can celebrate, as you see the Independence Day. We can have beautiful, great daily life. And I brought you the picture of Machne Yehuda. And you can see the pictures in Jerusalem today guarantees guarantees more than ever in history, freedom for all three monotheistic religions. All the Christian can pray and do their and access the Holy Sepulchre Church. The Muslim can practice their ceremonies in the Temple Mount, and the Jews can, of course, practice. We can practice our ceremonies and our excitement in the Western world. Thank you very much. Happy Yom Yerushalayim, and I would love to take any question.
Thank you so much, Omer. I'm happy Yom Yerushalayim to everyone. I see that some people are leaving already, and I understand. But we do have one question that was asked, and if people have more questions, feel free to share them right now in the chat. I will also share that briefly that I'm planning to do next year Jewish history sessions for B'nai Israel. So if anybody's interested in joining that, so please stay tuned and be on the lookout for that, because I think there's way so much more to go into this and make a whole session from it. So the one question that we have that somebody asked, and I think that you talked about this, but they were specifically asking about history of King David and King Solomon, or David and Shlomo, if it's based on Tanakh or if there's any archaeology that we have proving that basically.
So actually, this is great question, and there is a huge discussion among archaeologists and historians and other scholars about this question. People who see this the biblical descriptions as a historical description will go to the archaeological findings and will say, if we see a water shaft, it must be the water shaft that King David and Joab or Yoav conquered Jerusalem through. If we see the walls of a great palace on the top of the city of David, it must be King David. Palace. We don't have any remainings. Today, or archaeological remainings of the first temple that can testify about its nature, date of existence, where it was built, etc. So the argue is how to interpret the archaeological excavations. Some say it is from that time. Some say it is later. It is later, from the time that after the United Kingdom of Israel, the 12 tribes separated, and this description were written by the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, by the Judah kingdom, in order to give them the legitimacy. So personally, I love to treat the descriptions as history. But to be honest, there is this discussion. I'll say there is a transition in time in the just after the days of King Solomon and King David and King Solomon, where we see clear matching between the biblical descriptions and the archaeology, and then we have no argues about it. And I brought this example of King Hezekiah. Wall, the great wall, the wide wall he built to defend Jerusalem in the 8th century, the end of the 8th century BC, 2,800 years ago. And we see perfect matching between the biblical description and the archaeology. So from that point of time, even a little bit earlier, there is no discussion. The main discussion is just about the United Kingdom, whether it's accurate historical description or description that is written just a little bit later in order to for like internal political reasons. I take personally the first one, but each one can judge it according to the ways we have to judge it, which are not a lot.
Thank you so much. I will just note I'm a Jewish history major. I finished my first degree recently, and my teacher, or the professor who would talk about biblical times, she would say that the time of David and Solomon is a myth, and everything before that is a myth, and you can't prove anything. And she would shock all the religious people in the class to their core. So it's always discussion, but you have always the people who would take that extreme as well, or that opinion, and that's what you would say in front of class. So I just wanted to add that. Are there any more questions? Be happy to hear. Be happy to if people want to write in the chat as well. See, people are clapping their hands. That's nice. The teacher said that her name is Nili Vazana. So, Omer, maybe you know her. I don't know.
Actually, the name sounds familiar. Yeah.
She's a known professor for biblical times.
So there is this discussion. Actually, it's interesting. The stream which support the thesis that the description are historical and accurate, called the Jerusalem. The Jerusalem stream, and the opponents that saying that the United Kingdom is, the descriptions were written later, are professors from Tel Aviv, who doesn't claim that there was no temple and no city of David and no Jerusalem, but they just say it's 100 or 200 years later.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
Omer, wasn't there some archaeological finding? I seem to recall a decade or two back, a piece of pottery that had reference to in the reign of King David. Is that something you could tell us about?
So there is, as far as I know, there is one piece of clay mentioning the name Beit David, the house of David, or the kingdom of David. And this was found in the city, or the archaeological site of Dan, which is next to the Hermon mountain, very far away from Jerusalem. This is the only archaeological inscription that contained the name, the house of David, or the kingdom of David. In Jerusalem, not yet to be found. As I introduced, there are a lot of biblical names that had archaeological findings in Jerusalem. And at least 4 names are biblical names that are mentioned in the Bible just before the destruction of the first temple. And there is no argue about that. Actually, it's very interesting. It's not only name of scribers and ministers in the king of Judea. There are also names of the Israel kingdom. At that time, it was separated, showing there was a relationship or letter corresponding between the two kingdoms, also after the separation between. So there are definitely archaeological evidence for the biblical descriptions of Jerusalem. I would emphasize again that the arguments are limited to the times of King David and King Solomon.
Thank you.
Can I have also ask a question?
Of course. Yeah, no, Tomer.
So, Omer, when you come to the Kotel in the past few years, you see a site that is like, I mean, they kind of like close it to something, so you don't know what's going on, but you can see that they're digging up over there and discovering new things. So if you know anything about it, I would love to hear, because I'm so curious. And I know that they already discovered from the city of David, the original street and they dig a tunnel through the street to the Western Wall area. So anything that you can tell us about those two discoveries? Love to hear.
Yes. First of all, it's one of the most excavated areas, I think, in the world. And excavating the Temple Mount itself, it's not a possibility due to the geopolitical, religious tensions in the area. No one would do it. So one of the most excavated places are the areas surrounding the Temple Mounts, and it's continuously for decades. Since the 19th century, it's excavated. I think that what you mentioned is relating to a street and a sewage canal beneath the street. There is a valley. There is a valley between the Temple Mount and what we call the Western Hill, the Jewish Quarter. And each one of you that visited Jerusalem probably remember that arriving to the Western Wall, you enter through the Jewish Quarter and you go downhill. Then there is a little valley, and then the mountain and the Kotel, the Western Wall, is in front of you. So in the middle there is a valley that drains the city, and beneath it there is a tunnel. And a lot of excavation focused on this area, both to discover remains of the temple, but both to discover the layout of the city. And there were fascinating findings over there. For example, people who ran away from the destruction of the second temple and actually died in the draining canal underneath the street, and great evidence for the daily life and the catastrophe that the first and the second temple went through in this street.
I can also add that I have a friend who's an archaeologist, and she worked in the city of David, and I was lucky enough to get a tour because we're friends. And I don't know, it's near the city of David, and it's a street leading up to the Temple Mount from what I understood. But it's the second temple, so it's way later than what Omer was talking about beforehand. And you can see destruction. You can see, that the road is torn apart, that there's trees that have fallen, but it's the main road that you would have people like standing on a stage and announcing stuff. But it's very political, and that's why it's not really shown to the public yet, but just being able to see that was really special. And that might be what you're referring to. I don't know.
I'll try. I think I'm sharing my screen.
Yes.
Is it true? So a beautiful picture that I think this is the excavation just behind this wall here. The other part. This is the Western Wall. What you see here. Behind this part, this is what the Western Wall that we pray to. But this is also part of the Western Wall. This is what I introduced before. This is the street that go alongside the Temple Mount all the way to the city of David. You can see the street. You can also see the great destruction and the rocks that fell when the temple was destructed. They fell here on the street. You can also see that the street collapsed. You can see it here, that the street collapsed. The reason it collapsed because beneath it there is the draining, the sewage tunnel, and there was a lot of finding both of this on the street from the destruction and both beneath it. For example, the remaining of the people who went away from the second temple destruction was discovered in this canal, actually in the southern part of this canal, who actually just hid there from this great catastrophe. Some more very interesting findings were inscription from the second temple time. This is a sign in the place where people use the shofar to call for coming up to the temple. It was in the corner. It fell from this point here to this point here. You can see here very beautifully the geography. This is the Western Wall, 80 meters out of more than 500 that we pray to. We pray to in this part because this is the closest to the temple, and all this area, this is the city of David. This is the Davidson Center, is very, very, excavated, and raising a lot of curiosity throughout the generation for understanding the history of Jerusalem.
Okay, thank you so much, Omer, and thank you for answering the questions. I'll just summarize that most of our participants have gone. It's late, and I want to respect your time. So thank you so much for teaching us or talking to us about Jerusalem for this special day, and sharing the history and the momentous, important moments of Jerusalem's history. And there's way more to talk about. If anybody's interested, feel free to reach out and ask more questions. It's a subject that we'd always love to talk about. So thank you so much, and Laila Tov. And Yom Yerushalayim Sameach.
Yom Yerushalayim Sameach v'Shabbat Shalom. Toda rabba, Omer.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
We learned a lot.